Hi, today I'm going to show you how to turn your Nerf Rapidstrike from this into this. Let's get to it.
We're going to do a stock firing test the gun's performance, and be compared to the modifications we're going to do after. This is no modifications, 4C batteries. We're just going to shoot the entire 18 round magazine.
To improve the performance of the blaster, we're going to need some new parts. For flywheel motors, I have these two worker swordfish motors. They're going to be spinning these two aluminum flywheels inside of the worker 3 canted cage. Make sure you're using the correct wheels. These are wheels for the canted cage. If you're using flat gauge, make sure you're using proper wheels so it will work correctly. These are just the screws that came with the cage to screw the motors into the cage. And to improve rate of fire, I have this MTB Neo Badger motor. It's going to be our pusher motor and will feed the darts into the flywheel cage. To power all the motors, I have a 3S LiPo. Do keep in mind whenever you're using one of these, just to be careful. And to handle the power coming from the battery, I've got these 3 micro switches, which, unlike the stock switches, won't just burn up immediately. And for the switches, I actually have 3D printed a switch plate, which basically just acts as a guide so that you put the switches in the correct spot. I also 3D printed out these 2 triggers, all on my Prusa Mark IV. The modified trigger I found on Printables, and the switch plate I found on Thingiverse. To hold all the switches to the plate, I have 6 M3x15 screws and 4 M3 nuts. The last 2 screws actually thread themselves into the smaller holes in the plastic here, which is really nifty. Also, if you have a 3D printer, you might as well print out yourself an extended mag release. This is just a really nice quality of life upgrade. It's completely optional, but I always find it really handy. So I ended up using one of these buck converters, which is basically a voltage step down, which reduces the voltage. And I needed this because the pusher motor was spinning a little bit too fast, and it was damaging other parts inside of the pusher mechanism. You can find these on Amazon. There's a whole bunch of them. Some of them have displays. The one I got doesn't, and they're pretty cheap. All you have to do is search up LM2596, and you'll get a whole bunch of results, and any of them work fine. You're also going to need some connectors, which will depend on the type of connector that your battery has. Mine has a JST connector, so I have JST connectors. This makes it so that you can easily unplug your battery to recharge it. You're also going to need some wire and some heat shrink. To begin, we're just going to take all the magazine, and you should take off any other attachments you have on the blaster right now. And if you haven't already, remove the 4C batteries. You just have to unscrew the battery tray. And just like that, the entire battery tray comes out. So you can just take out the batteries. And you won't have to use these again. Now we do want the front part of the battery tray, so we're gonna unscrew these 2 screws here and get rid of the back part so we can make space for a new battery. And the back half just comes off, and again, you won't need this either. You can save this because along with the C batteries, this can make, a nice power supply for some other small project, but for the modification, you don't need this anymore. Do keep the front part though, because this will close up the front of the blaster when we put the new battery inside. Now we're going to flip the blaster over to the side where we can see all the screw holes, and we're going to start unscrewing all of the screws except for the ones on the stock here. So unscrew this screw and this screw, but don't unscrew these ones. Now that all of the screws are unscrewed, we can try to slowly lift the top half of the blaster. Just going to get this last one screw that I left because it's really long and does come out. Do be careful not to lose it when you are doing this. And as you're taking out the top half of the blaster, some screws may still be kind of inside. So just loosen them all up. This is just a part of the magwell that might come out. Keep that for later. As you are lifting up the top half, there is a small metal rod that you can just pull the top half away from. But as I will try to show you now, there is a little black cable that you saw right over here. I'll show it to you again. That is attached to the top half of the blaster and slightly prevents you from removing it. But that's not a big deal. Just take your long nose pliers and pull it down away from the top half of the blaster, because that's just the battery lead from the old tray, and we don't need that anymore. Just away when it comes out. After removing the top half of the blaster, we now have access to all of the internals. And this is really where the fun begins, because we're going to start by removing all the locks and all of the parts that we don't need. I'm going to start by removing these two parts. Unless you have an extended mag release, you will want to keep these, because this extended mag release will go in place of those two parts right here. So unless you have an extended mag release, keep these two parts. Also, just be careful not to lose the spring. It can pop out very easily. And you can also begin unscrewing the screws on the plate here and the screws on the flywheel, because we will be removing all of that. You can also remove this switch here, keep this piece though, and again, be careful not to lose the springs. You will want to keep the access door probably. We are just going to remove the little panel that holds the wires in place. Do keep it though. And it all comes out just like that. Again, there are some wires holding it together, but those will be gone soon enough. Now, one more thing, there is a lock switch up here, which is a bit hard to see, but after you remove some of the other pieces, you can get to it. That's what I'm going to try to do now. You can just pull it away from all the other things here and put these back. Just like that. And the last thing we need to do is remove the pusher mechanism here, and that has just 3 screws. The screws are pretty small. And just like that, the pusher mechanism comes out. You will want to save this, because we will be using the same pusher mechanism. We're only going to be replacing the motor that's inside. And as you can see, all of the electronics now will come out. And we are just left with the bare shell of the blaster. This is just the little part that went here. Just gonna keep that in some place. So this is pretty much what you have left. And if you want to, now that the shell is all bare, just remove these parts. Be careful not to lose any of the little tabs for the attachments. And you could paint this, but I'm not going to. As I mentioned before, we want to keep the pusher mechanism, and just for ease of use, and while you're modifying, you can just cut off these 2 wires so that while you're messing around with the pusher mechanism, all of this doesn't really get in the way. And you can get rid of all of this. Don't forget to keep the 4 screws that were on top of the old flywheel cage, because we'll need these to attach the new flywheel cage to the shell of the blaster. Now for the pusher mechanism, we're going to really carefully unscrew the 5 screws over here. Okay, now we've unscrewed all 5 screws, and we're going to really carefully try to open this up, and be careful because there is a lot of grease. There are these clips on the side that you have to unclip so that you can open this up. And like I said, there is a lot of grease here. But what we're really after is the little motor here with the worm gear on it. And we're going to try as carefully as possible to remove the worm gear from this motor, because we need this worm gear for the pusher still. After some pulling, it is possible to get it out though. And you can get rid of this motor as well. Now we're going to slide it onto our new motor. There is a part on the screw, the worm gear, that has a little plus sign. It's a little bit easier to insert it from that side onto the motor. Now we are going to have to do a little bit of cutting of the plastic here because unlike the stock motor, our motor has its leads on the side. But this isn't too hard, just cut the plastic in such a way that you are able to access these leads. So the way my motor is, I'll need to cut a little bit on the bottom here and a little bit on the top over here, but this might depend for what kind of motor you're using. No, I didn't do the greatest job here, but the leads of the motor are poking out, and that is what matters at the end of the day. I am going to leave it unscrewed for now so that I can easily open it up back later when I want to solder things to the motor. Now it's time to assemble the flywheel cage. So I'm going to take my flywheel cage and my 2 motors, and this is the front of the flywheel cage, so I'm going to put both of the motors' positive leads facing towards the front. Just like that. I'm going to use the screws that came with the cage to screw the motors to the cage using a precision screwdriver. One of them just fell out, but that's okay. That's one motor done. And there's the second one. So now the motors won't fall out of the cage, and they shouldn't be wobbly either. Now, we can press the flywheels onto the motor shafts. Just to get them fully inserted onto the motors. And then, you still need to push them down a little bit more. This wheel went down nicely, but this one's causing some problems. But that should be good. So, again, both positive leads should be facing towards the front, and just make sure that your flywheels are fully pressed onto the cage. And you can take the 4 screws from the old flywheel cage and just put them with the new one if you can. The magnets on your motors will let you, just so that you don't lose them. So we've got our pusher mechanism and our flywheel cage. Now I'm going to begin assembling the switch plate. But there is something we need to do to 2 of these switches first, which is remove the little metal levers, because they're going to get in the way, and we're going to try to cut them as close to the switch as possible to leave as little of the metal. To remove the lever, all you really need to do is just first bend it a little bit so that it's straight, and this will just make it easier to remove. And then, using pliers, you can grab it and bend it a little bit to the side so that it breaks the plastic a tiny bit. Like that. You have to bend it to the side, and the lever will just come out. Now you should have one switch with a lever and two switches without a lever. For the one switch with the lever, we're going to put that at the top of the switch plate here, and we're going to use two of the M3 screws, and we're just going to screw them directly into the plastic for this switch plate. I'm just going to use my hex wrench. Just be careful not to strip the plastic, because that is very easy to do. The switch should be secured in place. For the other two switches, there will be one on the bottom and one on the top like this. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to put two screws from the back of the switch plate, then insert the switch through them, and put on the M3 nuts. And I'm going to tighten these in a minute. And there, all three switches should be secure. And if you put the trigger in, it will press on that first switch, and the rev trigger will press on the lower switch. And this third switch here is actually the return switch. So this makes sure that when the pusher motor is fully extended, it will depress this switch. And basically the switch will make sure that the motor completes a full rotation so that the pusher returns to the back position, so that the next dart can come up. And it basically just makes sure that the pusher always returns after every single shot and always makes the full rotation. The last thing I'm going to do before I start doing any soldering is, as you can see, there is a little hole here, but it's blocked by this switch, and that's actually goes, that aligns with this post here for the screw, and we need to cut this down a little bit or else the switch plate won't actually fit. So I'm just going to cut away the plastic. It's soft and it's easy. It should only take about a second. And just like that, we should have room for our switch plate to go in, just like that. Of course, the rev trigger would go in right here, and the main trigger just like that. You can already kind of see how the blaster is going to look once it gets fully assembled. And I just love the clicky switches. Okay, so it is now time to begin the most important, but also the most complicated and annoying part of the mod, which is the soldering. I left this until last because, well, it's the most complicated and annoying part. Now, I am following a wire diagram, but I'll try to include it and sort of walk you through the process of how you should wire everything. We're going to begin with the flywheel cage. So, as you might remember from the assembly, we had both of the positive leads from each motor facing towards the front. You can see the red dots here are both pointing towards the front of the flywheel cage. So, when we situate the cage inside the blaster, this will be the top, and this will be the bottom. So I'm going to just refer to these as the top and bottom motor. Now, I've already done this, but what you're probably going to need to do is check to make sure you know which direction each motor will spin in and which direction they should be spinning in. Now, you want this, the top flywheel motor, to be spinning clockwise, and the bottom one to be spinning counterclockwise. This makes sure that they both spin this way, and that when you put a dart in, it will get shot out forward. So they should be spinning in opposite directions. Now, an easy way to check this is just to apply a low voltage. No, don't use the big battery that you're using, because that's pretty difficult and it might spark a lot. But I'm actually just using the same battery pack from the Rapidstrike with the 4C batteries, and I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to use these alligator clips to attach the battery to the motor. I'm just trying to be careful to make sure that it's not touching the outside of the motor and conducting there. And after I apply a small voltage, I can see that, well, sorry, if I put the positive leads and the negative leads, the motor does spin in the correct direction, and it is spinning quite slowly, which is curious. But anyway, this yellow cable is connected to my positive lead on the bottom motor, and the black one is connected to the negative lead. And when I connect the positive lead to the positive end of the battery pack and the negative lead to the negative end of the battery pack, the motor spins, and it does spin in the correct direction. I can see that it is spinning the way I want it to, such that a dart fed in through here would get shot out the other way. And because you know that the motors need to be spinning in opposite directions, and that the leads in the motors are the same directions, you can just invert that for the top motor. So I will need to put positive end of the battery here and the negative end of the battery on the positive lead. You might have already seen that I've cut out this wire, and what I did, I stripped out a little bit of the top and then measured more or less the distance between the posts of the motor, and I stripped a little bit in the middle. So I'll be able to solder both of these, this wire across the negative terminal on the first motor, on the top motor, and the positive terminal on the bottom motor. And this might differ if you set up your motors differently, but this is the way I need to do it. Always be careful when you're soldering. And that's the positive wire all wired up. The green and the black, that's just my heat shrink tubing. And now we're just going to do the same thing for the negative wire. And that's the negative side all wired up. So the positive lead on the motors will actually be going to our common on our rev switch, and the negative lead on the motors will be going directly to the battery. Since the flywheel cage is already wired up now, we can actually start screwing it down into the gun. Now, my flywheel cage doesn't fit in just yet, because there is a little bit of plastic here, but I'm just going to cut that away. Okay, so I still need to cut out a little bit more plastic. There's some plastic here too. So it's still not really the cleanest fit. Still use a little bit of work. I'm just going to remove that plastic piece altogether. Okay. Might not be the best fit ever, but once we put the screws in, it should be good. Just make sure that your positive lead is going out towards this side and your negative lead is going out towards the battery. And make sure that your negative lead is really nice and long, so that whenever you are replacing the battery to recharge it, it's never a hassle and you don't have to dig around inside the battery tray for a really small wire. Now, I probably should have done this earlier, but hopefully you haven't screwed down your flywheel cage if you're watching this video, and you'll be able to put a second wire pretty nice and long, because this will go from the negative terminal of the battery directly to the pusher motor. And even if you have screwed down your flywheel cage, it's okay, because I was able to thread this just under my flywheel cage and get it to come out at the same spot as the other negative lead. Now, there is one more wire that we need to thread through here, and it's the positive battery terminal wire that goes to the nominal open on the rev switch. And if your cage didn't fit the greatest, just make sure that all of your screws are really nice and tight so that it is in there, and don't be afraid to look down the barrel to make sure that it is actually straight. So now the negative lead on our pusher motor is all soldered up, and this will go straight to the battery. And now we're going to solder the positive lead And that will go to the common on our firing switch. And now the positive lead is also soldered up, so now we can close up the pusher mechanism and screw it down as well. Do just be careful when you are screwing down the pusher mechanism. These little brackets can easily snap, and I actually snapped this one right here. So just gently screw the pusher mechanism back into place. I really do have to apologize, because my explanation the first time I recorded it was not very good. So instead I'm going to give a wiring diagram, and the reason why my explanation wasn't very good is because I wasn't following this wiring diagram properly. So if you follow the wiring diagram, your Rapidstrike should work. Do note that there is a buck converter there, and that's to step down the voltage going to the pusher motor. It needs to be before the two switches, the return switch and the firing switch, so that the capacitors in the converter don't drain into the motor and keep it spinning when it's not supposed to. Now I'm just going to throw on some heat shrink wrap so you don't ever short circuit. And that pretty much should be it. Now I'm just going to make sure, check on the connector, which end is positive and negative for the battery, so I'll need to put the negative one here and the positive one here. And ladies and gentlemen, we should hopefully be good to go for a test now. And I'm going to plug in the battery. I'm going to try revving. Okay, our motors spin, and now I'm going to try, well, there we go. Our pusher motor is working as well, and it is quite loud. And you can see that the pusher motor does return back to the original position every time I do press it, because of the third switch here, which is our return switch. And the pusher motor is really loud. Anyway, all that's left is to close it back up, and we should be ready. Before we put it back together, we do have to do a little bit of cutting on the top half as well. Just very similarly to how we cut on the bottom half, we're going to have to cut some material around the flywheel cage, and also around the grip area where our switch plate is. So I was having some problems with the pusher mechanism. First of all, the worm gear actually stripped. Like, the motor slipped inside the worm gear, so I had to 3D print a new worm gear, and that's inside here now. But it's all good. I also got a buck converter, and this just basically steps the voltage down so that the pusher motor doesn't spin as fast. Yes, you're not getting as high darts per second fire rate, but at least the motor won't, shred open the rest of the gun and cause a whole bunch of other problems. It's just less likely to break now. And the buck converter basically just goes in between these two switches here. So from the common of this switch to the common of this switch, the nominal open of this switch, and this basically, and also the nominal open on this switch and the battery. So the buck converter doesn't interfere with this switch at all, so the flywheel motors aren't affected by the buck converter, but it affects these two switches here and the pusher motor, so that the pusher motor spins at a lower rate. And the reason why it needs to be behind these two switches is so that any excess power from the capacitors doesn't keep spinning the motor and causing it to continue to cycle, and even when the switch is depressed. So it does work now, which I'll show you really quickly. When you rev it, you might see that the buck converter light is going on. Like I said, that's because it is connected to the common on this switch, so when the power starts flowing, it does flow to the buck converter, but it doesn't go through these two switches yet, and only when I push the trigger while it's revving will the pusher motor start going. And you can also see that it does return back to the original position. It's finally time to close this thing up, and yeah, it's been a lot of troubleshooting, so I'm really happy to finally be done with this. Let's do it. Alright, there we go, that's the last screw in. All that's left to do is to screw in the battery tray. Alright, the battery tray is screwed back in, and now the modification is complete. All that's really left to do is test it and check out its performance. You can see the pusher mechanism going off in there. Really nice and fast.
We're doing another performance test, now with all the modifications and the 3S LiPo battery. Same thing as before, just the entire 18 round magazine.
If you couldn't already tell, I am super satisfied with the results of this modification. This gun is just so much more fun to play with now, because it shoots so much harder and so much faster, and it's just way more powerful. So, yeah, I'm really happy with how this turned out, and it turned out really well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, because it lets me know that you like my content. And making videos like this, like where I actually make things, like these Nerf gun modifications and my BattleBot video, those are my favorite kind of videos to make on this channel. So if what you like is what I think that's pretty amazing. Anyway, do comment down below if you need more clarification or if you found this helpful, because I read all of my comments and I'm super willing to respond to yours if you do comment down below. Anyway, like I said, I really do hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Happy nerfing, and peace out.